Yeah.
Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. And I do I'm so thankful. I consider this a great honor to be able to talk to you, Helmut, and you as well, Daria. And I met you through the journalist architect Joseph Giovannini, and I can't thank him enough for introducing me to such wonderful people, such interesting people. And so I know you as a leader at Zaha Hadid Architects, and I also know you as something of a digital guru in terms of
Wow.
the softwares.
Okay.
And then I could read from my Word document here. I certainly value every time we speak, and you're a leader at one of the greatest architectural firms to ever exist, really. That's in my humble opinion. And your firm has pushed the boundaries of what is possible in the profession. And as a specialist in digital representation, you're also positioned to translate dreams into reality at a more powerful level than almost any other discipline, perhaps. Yet as a practicing architect, you're also in the unique position of pushing pure imagination through all the complexities of building, which is once again why it points to your firm as truly pushing the field. So it's really a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak with you.
Likewise, right? David, we've already established through several events a relationship, and I think we're like-minded in our interest. And I think what we said before is that the whole area that is sort of coming together now on immersive technologies. And when you say technology is part of our geekdom and knowledge base, it's important, right? Because there is clearly a movement taking place within the discourse, within the discussion in our industry as space makers. I would say architects is something that I don't want to touch yet, but I think space making has a kind of a wider, maybe a bit more elusive character to it. That's why I quite like the term. And with that, connecting technology is inseparable, right? So a development, a discussion has to be on both of these major topics. One is, what is the space? What is it for? How can we improve space? How can we make space? But then on the other hand, how do you deliver it in this new medium, right? So we've done things in the past to our tradition, to our practices, our methodologies, the way we conceive them, with the way we conceptualize them, but then also how we execute them. And this has fundamentally changed. Not that we want to lose it, but we want to kind of integrate the new technologies, the new domains, and extend our space making as such. And also obviously for the consumer, right? For our clients, for our users in general, for the humanity in a way, right? So yeah, I mean, clearly we love this discussion, and as I said, it's maybe at the moment a critical point, because we don't know yet exactly where it's going. Right? The technology is evolving, the hardware is evolving, but also our cultures and our society, our perceptions are changing. Yeah.
Yeah, we're at a very interesting kind of unformed point in a lot of different areas of human intellectual pursuit, professional pursuit, and the extent to which architecture represents a zeitgeist, using the German expression. It's really a remarkable time, because I feel in certain ways like we're still in the throes of kind of chaotic postmodernism. I hesitate to use the word, but we're not in any kind of dominant cultural system internationally, certainly in the advanced societies, and more of the world is joining this kind of internet digital system. So let me start by asking you this question about materialism. I'll jump around in these 14 questions I have here, but there's now at the edge of a philosophical discourse. There's discussions as to whether materialism can even be proposed anymore.
Right.
And on one level, we now know that we're a bunch of molecules, kind of like brought together to do certain things, and they think even that consciousness may be at the quantum level. And this whole idea of even thinking of ourselves as materials is becoming deconstructed even as we speak.
Yeah.
And then the creation of the digital world, and I, myself, like many people across the world, have seen what your firm is now proposing for the metaverse, as it were. It seems to be we seem to be in the cusp of actually maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, but we seem to be in a situation where hyper reality, the metaverse, might actually be more real than what's on the outside. It's possible. So what is materialism? How is Zaha Hadid Architects looking at it?
I think clearly. I mean, I would approach it as an architect, as a space maker as such. So it is actually something fairly closely related to our own biological nature, to the way how we learn to understand the world, how we are using the world in our biological hardware. So I think there is an aspect to it that I think will not be removable, will not be separable. I think there is a theory of I mean, the general information theory has impacted our understanding of the world, the same as general relativity. Quantum physics is a realm that, for us in our scale, in our kind of usable domains, has very little straightforward direct relationships. I mean, it is present and it has impact, but on the other hand, I think there is a scale, there is a notion of space that is very closely related to our biological nature, to our normal natural scale. And we've been discussing this so often in a way that I mean, architecture has been the most global, most universal interface that we create in a way, engaging with our surroundings, with our world, and creating spaces for our collectives, for our societies, for ourselves. And I think there is a sort of a finite notion of scale that I don't think we will be able to lose or would benefit in losing. And I don't think there is a risk of dematerialization. Clearly, in the current technology, of course, the main focus is on visual, right? Because that's what our main senses are biologically. This is where we have our main perception in regards to our natural kind of evolution. But there is also attempts, and I was just in SIGGRAPH in Vancouver last month. There are lots of attempts in bringing in haptic information, bringing in tactile information, into those virtual environments and experiences. So in a way, I think we will have to see what the future holds, but I don't think we will separate ourselves from a material, from a tactile environment, because this is what our senses are about. We want to have perception enabled rather than reduced to the pure non-haptic visual information. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But to extend this a little further, so you take concepts like the multiverse, like and from and it's now fully in popular culture.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Meaning Marvel Comics.
Yeah, certainly, yes.
Right, and which, by the way, is a series of commissions that your firm should get.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we are obviously talking to a serious client, and of course, it is all based on the current level and the current status of technology, and the deliverable of the content is way below our threshold of expectations and values. And we would love to bring in a quality that has the resemblance of our natural environments. The way we perceive this information, the way we perceive this content, is the same way, through the same system, through our embodied knowledge that we have trained in our physical environments, right? And I think this is where I stand, is that there is no need to lose this level of resolution, of detail, right? I think that this is maybe the message that I would like to give. If we're accepting the bottleneck that we're currently having with the technology, and we're limiting the amount of content and information and space that we can perceive through this technology, I think it would be wrong, right? Technology is constantly evolving, and we as designers, we would love to bring in higher level of resolution, a more distinct, more personalized, more dynamic, more adaptable form of content of space than what is currently available. And we've been knocking our heads against those walls for at least another a year since we've started talking for commercial projects in this microverse
right
domain.
And by the way, Daria, you're invited to speak, certainly, if you want to comment. So, yeah. So again, I'll go into this in a couple different ways. So if you, for argument's sake, if you look at the work of Zaha Hadid Architects, there's an overwhelming, I would say there's an overwhelming perceptual feeling of the buildings that they are almost trying to dematerialize material. And I think through the power, and so what does that mean? Like, if you're looking at automobile design, the idea of curvilinear, robotically formed material, metal and plastics. It's really having to do with aerodynamic qualities, etc. But when you look at now with the electric cars, I think Mitsubishi or somebody like that is reintroducing their 90s boxy car. Right. But having said that, the overwhelming compulsion seems to be aerodynamic, etc. And if you look at so much of the work of your firm, there is a feeling of fluidity, and that's one of the words that I think Zaha was comfortable with. Yeah. She was not comfortable with biomimesis. She hated it. Right. So the work almost seems to be caught in midair in some of the best work, really, or that it's caught in the middle of attempting to form. It's caught at a certain moment. So one could almost argue that you want the work to literally be alive, to have presence, and to be this way one day and this way another day. And so one could argue that you, again, your firm operating truly at the top of the pyramid, both with the interest in the firm and the ability of your firm to respond to that interest, would appear to be attempting to dematerialize, in a sense. That's the question I would have.
Okay. Well, I think, as I said, I'm not opposing the idea of dematerialization, and we're looking at the full spectrum of architecture or architectural space. And in that sense, I mean, last time we spoke, I mentioned to you our Cybernetic Architectural Manifesto, where we are trying to combine the notion of a blended form of reality. So we have physical reality and we have a virtual reality on a sort of antagonistic ends of the spectrum. And there could be spaces that could benefit from both realities and the full extent of what this means. But then there could be architectural projects that sit somewhere in the middle, or kind of participate in different grades or different quantities in this bandwidth of realities, right? And I think when we're talking about material, as I said, as a builder, right, as an architect, where you say, okay, this is brick and mortar kind of origin of our business.
Or fiberglass reinforced plastic.
Okay, well, we progress a little bit, but what I'm saying is that if we're looking at this quality as an aspect of space, then I would say I wouldn't necessarily want to lose this, because there's an enormous quality to it. There's enormous craftsmanship and tradition bound, culture bound into this material aspect of space. But as I said, when we are looking at virtuality as a quality that we can add or augment this architectural process or architectural result with, then of course, I mean, when you look at abstract concepts in terms of information overlays, in terms of injecting qualities into this, whatever it is or will be, then clearly there is a non-material component that we would definitely be interested in, and we're looking at now at design scopes that look at user interfaces. There is nothing material about it, right? But without user interfaces, you cannot navigate in virtual space. So there is an immaterial aspect coming in. When it comes to the evolution in terms of having a singular space, a singular formula, I think we'll also have to be very critical about how the modern experiment is progressing, right? I mean, you talked about postmodernism, we talked about post-structuralism, we're talking about orthodox modernism, and the critique that immediately emerged in the 1930s, in the 1920s, on this sort of very rigid, style dogma that kind of emerged in the sort of early modernist period. And we're discussing this quite intensely, how these critics, I mean, coming from psychology, Lacan, I mean, Freud, Lang, and then also we're looking at the situationists, we're looking at Kinzler, the way that they wanted to understand space and space making related to different values, different things. And I think this is where we are right now. We have to reopen all these comments and commentaries in a way to formulate what we're going to do with augmented reality, augmented physical reality as space makers, but also as society, as cultures.
Yeah,
so material is a small aspect, I think, in terms of what we have to inject into this discourse.
Well, so let me try to help you extend your thinking too. And one of my questions here was, what I'll ask. Well, let me introduce it by saying I think architects have this quality of trying to do it all. Right. Now, certainly,
this is something that we clearly want to object to. So I think there's clearly a collaborative and a cumulative aspect there. I mean, we have to go through a learning process, reapplying our skills, refocusing on our skills in a way that clearly will not be able to be done in-house, right? This is not a job for architects alone, for sure. And I just wanted to
sure. But what I mean is that as again, going back to an aspect of how we started the discussion, like this idea of the German term Zeitgeist, the spirit of the time. And architects have seemed compelled, arguably from the origin of human civilization, to try to capture a moment, try to capture the spirit. You could argue, the original works of architecture were funerary monuments, the pyramids being perhaps some of the most notable examples. And, the cathedrals certainly were inspired by Christianity, but arguably, maybe without much argument, are these holders of tremendous spiritual energy because of the yearning of people to try to, ask those questions. What happened before the Big Bang, or what have you? So this idea of if there is a continuum, and if you look at the history of architecture, it does seem to point that way, that we are evolving. Architecture seems to be attempting to capture the state of human consciousness at different epochs during its trajectory. So, how would you see, and does Zaha Hadid Architects talk about, what is the goal? Is there a goal of humankind in 100 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years? Again, it becomes a very important question with a firm such as yours, which is really pushing the envelope. You're doing work that most architects may not get to for another 100 years at most. I mean, I'm still trying to build Frank Lloyd Wright. You know what I'm saying? And so to how does you have the opportunity to perhaps really contribute to this, but where are we bringing? Is that something that architects can do, and how do you see that extending into the future?
Okay, I mean, obviously, this is a heavy question. So maybe let me approach it in a way that we have been also trying to attack from our end. What is, first of all, the lesson that Zaha represents, as a person, as an influencer, and as the initiator of the Zaha Hadid experiment, let's say, right? I mean, sadly, she passed away six years ago, and we have to find our own footing and also continue to be aggressive and to continue challenging the formula, right? Because that's what she clearly opposed, right? She never wanted to plateau on a certain level, and I think that's why the idea of progress cannot be also a superficial one, right? Where we say, okay, well, we're just having a piece of technology now available. What are we going to do with it? Because we have to. I think there has to be a deeper meaning and a purpose. And from where I stand personally, I think our mission for mankind at the moment is becoming a much wider, a much more existential one that cannot be answered by pushing things into sort of metaphysical or spiritual planes. I think we need to approach it from a humanistic point of view, from a personal point of view, from a human point of view, a realistic point of view, where we say, okay, these are the problems, we need to tackle them and we need to solve them. There is no higher being or there is no authority that we can, leverage solving these problems in. So when we're talking about this, when we started writing and doing our research, we called it the super individual. And this is something that we kind of relate to also from our point of view with Zaha as a persona, because we experienced her as a creator, as an architect, but also as a human, right? And she had a kind of a figurehead quality to her life and to her persona. And in a way, taking this as the most holistic way of interpreting this, we said, look, we are all individuals and we need to recapture in some way what it means to be a society, what it means to be a creative collective, and how do we enable that? How can we augment that with the new levels of technology that we have available? Also coming from our actual work within projects, international projects, seeing the amount of information loss, seeing the amount of misconception, and also how to communicate space. Space is a phenomenon of many dimensions. And when we're seeing how we currently develop ideas and concepts, it's all two-dimensional projections, text-based, numerical-based. But for us as designers, as space designers, it's almost impossible. And why would we stick ourselves through these kind of pinholes? So this was the origin of the starting point of our discussion. What is that personal point of view that we have now being given by this technology? That we've been messing around in a way, but in a kind of a remote way. Now, where do we go from there? Where do we see society having to move and our clients and our space has to kind of capture? I think it has to be something that is on a deeper level, more individual. It has to offer a wide-ranging interfacing and quality for a huge variety, a huge diverse population, so that we can tie in individual interests. And this is where I think social media has offered a platform that is unheard of on a global scale. And we need to see how architectural space comes into that. And Web 3.0 and the metaverses are offering at least the big question mark. Can we hold this level of collectivism inside this virtual space? And the other is clearly a learning process, a relearning process, how to read what happened in the past, what did really go wrong. Last time we mentioned the Anthropocene. I mean, we have fundamental global problems that cannot be solved within the current platforms in our discussion forums. We need to extend that.
Yeah.
Daria, do you have anything you want to add? I mean,
yeah, I just wanted to highlight that with increased connectivity, what's emerging is an ecosystem approach to design, where we're no longer relying on the wisdom of one designer. It's about bringing in the expertise at the necessary time, having the conversations as early as possible, and then even letting the design collective evolve, user testing before building is built, and having the idea and the ability to deconstruct as well as to construct the creations in order to iteratively evaluate, modify. So it becomes much more of an organism. It has an organic life. It has the capacity to evolve much quicker than the kind of static physical world architecture. But we're also hoping that through testing this in virtuality, there's also going to perhaps be a more fluid approach to how we address the physical world. These things can start to feed back into our physical environments as well.
And maybe when we talk about extension, I think our definition of where the job, I mean, where architecture sits, since we talked about post-structuralism and postmodernism, I think we have to face a much wider scope. Right? Where does the project start? Where is the architect involved as a biased, creator? Where are the other creators? Where are the sources that contribute? What are the economies that lead to projects? And then where is the project finished? And we believe that a project is always in progress, right? You can erase a project, but you can rebuild it, or you can modify it, you can adjust it. And I think there's sort of a wider understanding of what we have to deliver, what we have to contribute to, where we have to collaborate, and where we have to find consensus along the way. So I think there is clearly a lesson from this more individual, deeper individual level of our approach and our sort of emerging understanding of these new processes. So kind of a more immediate involvement in a specialized merit-based collective, and then having a higher iterative sort of throughput in a way that we say, okay, simulation actually is already an experienceable space. We can communicate space from the very first moment and have feedback loops in the way how we then evolve the project, evolve the designs. And execution is almost sort of an arbitrary point in this discussion, because our simulations are now so experienceable, so individually kind of insightful, right, that you can almost branch off. And I mean, the topic of digital twins pops up there, where you say, okay, we can have projects that have sort of a twin existence, and they can keep on influencing each other. We applied for a competition and a research project that looked at kind of overlaying AR into the physical public domain. We planned pavilions in a city in Europe, and the idea was to have persistent AR information extension to the physical space present that can be personalized, and it can have multiple additional functionalities added to the physical space, right? And we would develop and we would design this simultaneously. There is no wallpapering, right? It will be one consistent approach to a spatial design. And maybe that brings us back to the materiality, right? Some aspects will be non-material, immaterial.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And actually to go back a little bit to what Daria was saying, again, I wonder if the trajectory isn't literally towards an fully artificially intelligent building. To the extent, again, if you take Ray Kurzweil's, the chief engineer of Google, his prediction that that by 2035 we'll have reached the singularity and that computers will be sentient. So scary point or not, depending on your what you believe. But the idea of a building becoming fully sentient, and I think one could argue it's starting to happen, perhaps to Daria's point, but maybe extending it further. I'll go back to this idea. I said earlier that I always love going into cathedrals. If I'm in a city, especially European city, I'll look for the cathedral to kind of get my bearings. And you're looking at the the first one of the first massive celebrations of the spiritual, in terms of all the financing coming together. Decades and decades, if not hundreds of years of construction, just to see the light at the top of the top of the apse, as it were. But I'm reminded of a little bit of my understanding of Aldo Rossi's work, speaking about early postmodernists. But this idea that the building was independent of program, that it started to become something that belonged to something else other than the fact that it was a hospital. And when you look at Europe, you see that time and again. It's the reuse of buildings, and they become other things. And so, I'm wondering if we're reaching a point. And again, AR seems to go in this direction where I'm also reminded, by the way, I don't know if I'd so recommend reading this book if you haven't, Cixin Liu, if I say it right, Cixin Liu. The Chinese science fiction writer, he wrote The Three Body Problem. Someone could correct me if this goes to YouTube and chat how to pronounce his name correctly. But The Three Body Problem is this, award-winning, wonderful series of books, and he extends himself into the future beautifully, and he speaks of not only space stations but environments that are blank. Fully blank. So the form becomes independent, fully independent program. And the programming comes alive as holographs or what have you from the building itself. And it's entirely malleable. It's immaterial. The program of the building becomes immaterial. If you look at these ads, and I'm sure you have it, like Zuckerberg's Metaverse, and he's got the doctor with the VR goggles, kind of operating on a patient virtually. Again, it's this immaterial, and eventually that is already starting to happen, where the surgeon can be operating over here, and the robot is actually doing the actual surgery. So it sounds like you're already starting to do that, but I wonder if that isn't a major component of where architecture is going. But I'm going to take it one more step, and I think in terms of in terms of our significant problems with climate change and the destruction of our planet, etc. So here's a couple challenges or comments. Is that we are now, more than any other time in history, overwhelmed with a tidal wave of concrete. Concrete is, there's never been more of it. It's shutting down the earth, literally shutting down the earth. There's an argument that can be made. I think if you read certain environmentalists, that we need to figure out a way of doing buildings without concrete. There's actually tremendous concern about it. And initially the form, the liquid form that established the power of Zaha Hadid's architecture was concrete. It's becoming other things now, of course. But I wonder if architecture does have to burrow into the ground eventually, and that form will take on you'll be forming landscape. But I wonder if disappearance, immateriality again, is what we need to do just to survive. I don't know.
Okay, I think we will probably have to attack it from end of your questions to the beginning. I think the main point that sort of pops up for me, I mean, reading through all your questions now, is representation. Architecture was always a representational, deliverable for a certain fraction of a society, mostly privileged. And I mean, you talk about the church, the institutions, I mean, representative architecture. And I think our practice has always been, as you say, in a quite high level of this sort of monopolies, let's call it. I think churches in particular, I mean, we're talking about, the high times of church also as a worldly organization, as a power institution, use the architecture to demonstrate their power and their influence over the populace, with means that have been groundbreaking. I mean, geometry, I mean, masonry work. I mean, if you see the Freemasons as a kind of an outlet of the power that was accumulated by these craftsmen that had, the commissions. Geometry was always something that led to a demonstration of the capacities of the human knowledge, right, and skill set and methodology. And I think geometry has been used to represent different stages of the modern experiment as well. I mean, Zaha's language has transformed from a splintered deconstructivist
Right.
language to this kind of fluid shapes. And I think the fluidity was also initially, and I'm not sure if it's 100% correct, because I think fluid shapes have also different qualities that relate also to the psyche. I mean, we're looking at Gestalt psychology and also, you know, the kind of connotations that are more embedded in the human experience. But then fluidity, I mean, we're looking at the 1930s streamlining. You talked about aerodynamic shapes, was an expression, you know, to say, okay, we're living in a dynamic society, we're living in a progressive society where dynamism was favored over the static, the tectonic shapes. And the release from the shape, from the pragmatic functional aspects, like you mentioned Aldo Rossi and the postmodern, I mean, all the styles effectively have been used to sort of showcase the intellectual capacity. I think that we are not talking about something that has a shape and a function, but there is an intelligent overlay and a construct that is being demonstrated and represented by the architecture. And I think there is something intriguing about it, that now we're talking about a medium space that doesn't need aerodynamics, right? So, you know, why would we have to have aerodynamic shapes in virtual spaces? Because there is no gravity, there is no need to push matter through another medium that has to then take on a certain aerodynamic shape. And this is the big question: what are we going to do there, right? What is going to be represented in this space? And I think that's why we're talking about the super individual in a way that we're talking about accumulated knowledge and experiences that will have to be somehow represented in this new space. Because there is no other real, well, let's call it requirements. I mean, we're talking about an economy, for example. We've had a long conversation with technologists about what is the new economy? What is the new gravity in this space? And we're talking about level of detail. I mean, Unreal Engine has developed the idea of nanites, where, you know, the geometries, the meshes break down the further you're away from them. So in order to minimize the calculation power and need it for visualizing the content. So there is a new form of spatial requirements and economies emerging from these new worlds that we will have to listen very careful. I mean, as I said, we ran into walls regarding there's a lower level of expectations towards what we can do as space makers in this space. And if we can only have 4 people co-present, then, I mean, how can we do an arena where we want to have 100,000 people in there? And what if we want to show something shiny, but you can't, right? You can't have dynamic lighting. You're really tied down by the bottleneck that is the technological platform. And maybe as a last stab at this sort of materialism, I think if we're talking representation, material will have a quality that we want to recognize. So it's about recognizability as well. I mean, we're working with Adobe, for example, on high definition textures, and there are parametric textures, and you want to see something fluffy, you want to touch something that feels like concrete or like stone, and these are things that are so embedded in our understanding, in our perception, that we don't necessarily think this is something we just want to chuck out of the window, right? But there is a different economy, a different realism behind that, for sure. Yeah. Daria, do you have any other ideas?
No, I think you covered a very broad range of ideas. I'll sit still for a minute.
So actually, I'll go to materials, for instance. So in the buildings that I design, I'm already past, let's say, I've had my opportunity to do some sculptural concrete, sure, no problem. But in my multifamily housing, even in my luxury single family residential work, stucco has gone away. People don't want stucco anymore. That's only happened in my practice, and arguably for like the many practicing architects, it's only really gone away maybe in the last 15 years, 16 years, because the high-end residential work, people want porcelains, they want materials where they can control to the nth degree what this materiality actually is. So is it there's so much you can do with manufactured stone. It's such a big spectrum. And so in addition, it lasts for 50 years. So the argument for stucco, it just all those craftsmen, all that tactility is gone. And what other comment is that when I teach my construction studio, or when specifically, I'm teaching in a construction department as well as an architecture department.
Right.
For the contractors, I'm basically saying what your profession has evolved into is you are manipulating the products of corporations. So if your grandfather was a magnificent carpenter, he's really become a rarefied individual. Now there may be some need for some craftsmanship at that level, but the machine robotics are exceeding what your grandfather could do. So the corporations are absorbing that, and once again, you could argue that Zaha Hadid Architects, maybe specifically, but they're at the top of the pyramid. The form that you're creating is resistant to the corporation. It's not fully repeatable.
I wish that would be true. I mean, obviously, we have a bandwidth of different projects, different clients, and maybe this would be the answer, because I don't think there is a generally applicable recipe. I mean, I come from a sort of a Bauhaus school background, and of course, form follows function, and obviously the kind of purity of the construction, as in representing what you actually want to also express and represent in terms of space making, was a different sort of focus. But what I think at Zaha's, there is the experiment, there is the expression, and there are several different value systems, let's say, at knuckleheads, right? Where we say, okay, there is a client clearly with a budget, and you try to make something happen in reality. So I think the concrete came from the modern, the classic modernist construction methodology, and that was, I think, a nod towards that tradition. And I believe that we've done probably the same amount of projects not favoring fair-face concrete. And we realized also very quickly that fluided forms are not very easy done in situ, by the way, or let's call it impossible. So I think
nicely said.
We adapted. What I believe, and we work with Werner Sobeck as a German engineer who introduced the whole automotive recycling and material classification system into the building industry. And I'm not sure how successful he has been, but if you're looking at the design life of buildings and you want to then recycle, for example, the building industry is still one of the most wasteful, outdated industries. I mean, when we're talking about concrete and sealing the earth, I mean, when you look at the automotive having impacted our cities, I mean, especially in North America, I mean, the parking lots, when you look at LA, I mean, there's maybe 70% of the downtown area is parking lots that sealed earth, right? And the buildings themselves actually don't matter at all. And I think also in terms of sustainability, I mean, we're starting to look at really kind of localized supply chains, because if a material has to come from the other side of the planet, and you look at the embedded energy, the process it takes to get that material on site, maybe it's wiser to say, okay, we'll have something. Maybe in North Europe, you have a lot of timber housing construction. They've also evolved the methodology, and we have high-rise buildings now made from timber. And we're looking into these methodologies and different materials completely. I mean, there's no hesitation. I don't think we have a kind of a focus on concrete as such. And if you have a CNC mill approach, a form making, molding approach, there is no way that you can do this in situ concrete.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I
So
just wanted to add
yeah,
one more
sorry.
thing. I'm sorry, David. If we are also dovetailing with contractors, but with often smaller, highly specialized contractors, highly skilled, who are open to developing their technology alongside the design with us. So
Yes.
we're co-evolving, and we'll often come back to those same contractors time after time for the production of new forms and new buildings because of that working relationship and that openness to changing the status quo.
And I think one aspect is also, again, the actual application. I mean, buildings don't have to be there if they don't have to be there. I mean, your example of superfluous space and whatever, the hypes, I mean, the development architecture has brought up, these business parks that are 5% use it. I think there's clearly enough examples to say, okay, maybe in the simulation of those use cases, we can eliminate some of the big errors that we've been making in the recent past. I mean, I always said, look, if people can climb Mount Everest without actually having to physically do that, that would save a lot of trouble, environmental damage. It's about an experience, right? And why would we have to do this in physical reality? Anyway, what I'm trying to say is I think there's a local aspect to creating architectural spaces that should look at it from an ecological and an ecosystem-wide perspective. And that's what Daria was saying, is that there is no such thing as a universal answer. And I think we're kind of almost avoiding this idea of an architectural theory or a style that can be placed on a green lawn, right? And in some way, this is also resulting from the critique on, the Athens sort of modernist style and the ratio that was sort of rolled out, right, and applied to all corners of the world for many, many wrong reasons. So the CM architecture is long gone, right? But I mean, we still feel the idea that there has to be styles and there has to be a sort of a rational explanation, a recipe that can be applied. And maybe we don't need to do that anymore.
I do think on the one level, again, because of the corporation, for argument's sake, the grab bag, the kind of what is our culture? How do we define culture? I think that I'm a student of Ken Frampton, the great Columbia architectural historian, and he was very influenced by Jürgen Habermas and by these ideas of actually almost a resistance to the dominance of modernism, a certain point of resistance. But Ken Frampton really espoused doing it through modernism, not through this immense reaction towards neo-Roman, neo-fascist, and so that what is that point of resistance? How does one resist? Does that or could that help grow culture back in a way? Because what's happening now, and it's easy to say that it's overwhelming. What's happening now is a grab bag. So I could choose out of this bag. I take Zaha. Out of this bag, I take some neoclassical, architect. And we had a very, very big troubles with our last government, and this fellow wanted to make all national architecture neoclassical.
Right.
Terrible. It was a terrible nightmare.
I mean,
and it's been resisted.
It's always the sign, right, where you say, okay, what is a good piece of architecture? What is a relevant piece of architecture? And I mean, I see it as the equivalent to high art. I don't think there is a rational way of evaluating this. I mean, really long term, I think there's a selective process. What you can do in the present is to obviously be the most informed, the most advanced, the most knowledgeable entity and engage with people on that level of uncompromising, focus and attention and processing, all these ideas and eliminating mistakes and coming in to a kind of an exceptional space where you say, okay, this is what we need to do. And you have that level of conviction. I think that informs your work and your result. And I think, from quoting also Zaha, I think there's no alternative to hard work, right? And of course, also having the right place in time and having the connections and being aware of all the issues that are surrounding you, right? And I think clearly the world has changed over the last, 5 years, 2 years even, coming out of the pandemic. I think we need to have an open discussion. We need to have a knowledge transfer. We need to bring in all these players that will enable us to do exceptional work. And that's what we want to do. Like, everybody wants to do that, I guess, to have a meaningful result and not go with, as you say, a fascist excuse for negligence ultimately, right? Because if you build a Doric Greek temple now, what are the problems? What are the things that you're addressing? None, right? And I think that's maybe the answer, is that if you have that level of awareness and you bring in also the economy and you have that openness that solves issues rather than avoid them, I think you're a better architect, or a better designer, or a better citizen for that matter.
Yeah, I'm reminded that I may be misinterpreting Ken, but I think he was the one who taught me that all architecture is political.
Absolutely.
And if you choose to not be political with your architecture, you're being very political.
Yeah.
Because you're collapsing into the status quo.
It comes back down to, also cybernetics, the word comes from the navigator, right? You have a sender and a receiver, and in between you have information. So bias is something that comes with being a human. And in a way, you have to communicate and you have to find consensus. This is not something that happens naturally inside an individual, but if you're bringing in multiples and you bring in a society, you bring in institutions, then it becomes immediately political. There is no such thing as being apolitical, even as a normal human being, right? And I think that's the nature and the law behind our existence.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Also, I think what we're learning from simulation space is to see life and also our activity in 4 dimensions, with the 4th dimension being time. So I think we're now better able to understand the influence of our action in time, and also see how today is influenced by history. And so we're maybe at the cusp of being able to rebalance some values through just access to information, and through being able to project, into the future, the consequences of certain choices today, and seeing how, certain negative or positive choices have resulted from very clear decisions and actions in the past, and sort of weave the thread, so we're not entirely stabbing in the dark, and just to be very conscious about every choice that's being made. And it's fine if it's not the right choice. If you're aware of why you made that choice at that point, you can learn from it in the next iteration, or others can learn from even great disasters.
And the sad fact is to be an architect, and the validity of being an architect is something that you also questioned, David. I think we have to have solutions. We have to have answers. I think that's the premise, right? We are not going to be approached by a client if we're just raising other questions. And I think answers come through practice in intellectual and conceptual terms, but also in execution, architectural, practical architectural work. And we've been blessed so far and privileged to have also executed a lot of these works that you could say 70% of it remains theoretical, remains unbuilt. And when these things happen, you can't really say this is because we're good architects, but also because we have the right context. We have also very good clients, right? That have to be as brave and as challenging us and their environments. And they also want to represent space and ideas. So in a way, I think what we're doing is right now carefully formulating strategies towards what we call cybernetic architecture. But there is a lot of debate, but also a lot of practice needed to actually come to an answer that would solve our, let's say, immediate issues regarding what we see coming. right? So a cybernetic society is an economy, is a knowledge structure, an information system that still needs to be established. I mean, the digital divide is something that's as equally daunting as climate change, right? We have enormous amounts of people on this planet disconnected from information, from the information age. And without that being established, how can we talk about advanced societies and the metaverse? We're locking out enormous amounts of people. So in a way, we're kind of sitting there trying to hone our answers that we can give or contribute as architects. And I think, again, we have several pilot projects, we have several lines of investigations, and this will lead to informed actions. We will have a different approach towards space making, and I believe we're kind of already making another step in our formulations. So it's actually really an exciting time.
Wonderful. I can see right now that I'd like to talk for about 4 hours, to be honest with you.
Okay,
But
yeah.
Well, maybe it'll have to be a part 2 and part 3.
Sure.
But I would say maybe the last question comment. Obviously, the United States has always been, for better or for worse, blessed with being detached from Europe, physically detached by about 3,000 miles.
It depends on which sort of time periods and personnel you're looking at. I think a big fraction from my family is actually immigrated, and they're there. I mean, so.
Well, yes, but what I mean is that this detachment has produced all sorts of perhaps, I don't know what we could talk about positive, but there's certainly been some dysfunction in there. One of the ways is that we can give billions and billions of dollars of armaments to the Ukraine, and they're really fighting, for argument's sake. I think most of the world would probably agree that they're fighting for the free world right now. And there were some recent comments from maybe I don't want to name, we know who they are. There were certain leading architects that said that did that thing where they said we should detach ourselves from judging who our clients are, and architects just do the thing, and we do it with their investment in us, what they hire us for, especially if you're a leader in the field, as your firm is, and then we get to manifest certain political realities. For instance, the fluidity of Zaha's work is a kind of openness. You can almost easily argue that it's an open-armed architecture, whereas for the opposite extreme, some rigid neoclassicism with specialized rooms, especially in the 21st century, is particularly closed. And do we then view Vladimir Putin's Russia as a neoclassical closed system? This is what the man wants now? I don't know.
Sure.
So, Ukraine may very well hopefully they will defeat Russia and we'll get out of this. But it's a very scary time. And it has a certain architectural implication, again, if it means you're going to burrow into the land or what have you. I don't know. But the Ukraine specifically might be one of those places that has to really rethink how we exist in the 21st century.
I mean, we have actually been affected by the war, and it's not just a special mission. It's a full-fledged war. And Daria, of course, personally, she is from Ukraine, and her father is still in Ukraine. But maybe, Daria, you can elaborate on that perspective. But I think as an office, we have a project in Dnipro that was stopped. We obviously wait for peacetime to re-emerge and for us to continue the project. It was an infrastructural project, a subway system, stations. And I mean, of course, now, us acknowledging that everything is political should also lead to ourselves acknowledging the fact that peace and civil discourse is, first of all, something very precious. I mean, to be apolitical is a potential risk-taking, right? If you don't contribute to a discourse, to a process of opinion shaping and making that you equally, when you're absent, also inform the consensus, right? You're changing politics by not being present in the process. As an institution, as a discipline embedded in legal systems worldwide, different legal systems, contractual relationships, it's really hard to say, okay, what is my responsibility in these processes, right? I mean, architecture is no longer just one architect and an executive kind of contractor and the client. I mean, there is a whole network, a mesh of regulations that we have to adhere to, and there's a lot of specialization, not just also on the creative team, but also on the client side, and then the authorities having to come in. So in a way, I mean, this discussion is not so easily addressed in terms of the politics. Clearly, we would want to have ideal conditions for everyone involved, right? Equally, also the workforce executing the work. And I mean, all you can have, and this is a very English term, is due diligence, where you say, okay, I'm trying to do my part to make this a fair process, a safe process, also a healthy and sustainable result, right? But I don't want to go into systemics, and I don't want to go into the ramifications of how far we see ourselves as autonomous creators that have to take responsibility for our work. And I would, of course, say, yes, we are responsible. I mean, we were looking at this pilot project we call Super Chalet, and we decided to have the outer shell in stainless steel. And it's a very, very energetic, wasteful material, but on the other hand, it lasts forever, right? So do you want to decide on going for some organic material that is easier to produce, easier to recycle, or you want to do something that has a very, very long design life because you believe in the value of it, and you say, okay, maybe this will be passed on through generations like a precious Swiss watch, right? So in a way, I'm seeing the way how we formulate our responsibility should be through our work and should be through the people and the parties that we work with and for. I think that's foremost, I think, my understanding of my responsibility. I'm not a politician, you see.
Yeah, I feel like if everyone rises up to be emotionally responsible, self-aware individuals, then everyone will be able to make that choice for themselves. I feel we start to tread on really thin ice when we say this is how it has to be, and everyone must follow what we say.
And maybe the choice of clients. I mean, this is something which I find obviously quite tricky, right? Because we are a service industry. I mean, the project I just mentioned, we did because we actually wanted to do something where we are our own clients. So it's kind of a research project where we say, okay, we'll do this out of our own accord for ourselves without having to deliver this to a client, right? But if we're saying normal architectural projects, we are serving a client, an originator who has the money and who will sponsor our work. And therefore, it's very difficult to say, okay, well, we're going to choose the right client. In the beginning of your process, you don't know exactly who is your client, right? What is he about or she, and what is it about if it's an organization? And these processes, I mean, the design process reveal a lot of what your client is. And at the same time, you are never approached by a client who, immediately compromises your situation in such a way, right? Even though there are instances where we say, okay, we can't work with you, and that's because of national interests or just our KYC process. That does happen.
So I think there's a lot more I want to talk about. I think that we should probably maybe we can talk about another session, and I think I'll probably maybe it'll go for a few hours. We can both talk about that. I thank you so much for your time today.
Sure.
And I hope I hope you feel that we covered some interesting topics and maybe set the stage for future discussion.
The issue is here as well. We have so much to talk about. I mean, yes. I wanted to talk about Walter Benjamin's sort of insight into the reproduction I mean, authenticity and authorship. This is something we should have also, I think, touched on, because we talked a lot about materiality, but ultimately, what is really challenged at the moment is the fact that our entire modern period was accompanied by the fact that authorship actually was almost demolished. We would not have a single authenticated piece of art because everything could be reproduced, especially in the information space, especially in the virtual space. Everything is copy and paste. And with the NFT and the blockchain connecting into that space, we suddenly have a horizon where we can have authenticated singular pieces of art. And we as authors obviously are clearly interested. I mean, it's not just an economical interest, but to have something that you own and that you make is almost coming back now. And we're looking at a black hole of time, a period of time where this was unimaginable, right? In terms of digital production, I mean, all our digital creations are unprotected. And we feel this is another enormous change in paradigm that we need to look at also very carefully. And is it actually foolproof? Is it actually working? Because the crypto from which this all kind of originates, the cryptocurrencies, they are far from mature as systems of authenticating our art and content. And when you look at large-scale data sets and models, how can you make sure that these are protected and you have the privacy as well to enjoy them, right? So this is a discussion that I think at the moment almost overrules the discussion of materiality. But we'll see how it goes. And yeah, so we'll maybe have to have another discussion.
Oh, I would I would so welcome that. Yeah.
Brilliant. So yeah, thank you for offering us your platform.
Thank you, David.
Oh yeah. No, it's my pleasure. Absolutely. I want to make sure I save this right. So I guess we'll close for today, and I'll email you, and we'll stay in touch, and I'll send you this recording. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then also please keep us posted on your other discussions. So yeah, we're eager to follow your.
Sounds great.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
Thanks.